right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. For those of you wondering why I'm doing another one when I just did one last week, you could blame Renegade Game Studios because they have released 3 PDFs in less than a week. So yes, don't direct your fury towards them. They're lovely people. But yeah, so new Power Rangers sourcebook came out. It's called A Jump Through Time. I was super excited about it before getting it, and now I'm doing an in-depth review. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. That being said, when I do an in-depth review, I mean in-depth. I go through the review chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I talk about the things I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did well, the things I think they need to do but better. But that takes a long time, and a lot of people don't want to sit through a 2-hour video just to figure out if they want to buy something. So I always start these things off with a should you buy this section, and I separate that into 3 different potential buyers. The first group is people that I call players. Players are people that are going to sit down at a table and primarily, not exclusively, but primarily are going to play a single player character in a game. The second group is a group that I call GMs, or Game Masters. They are a group of people that are going to sit at a table and primarily, not exclusively, are going to be sitting in the GM seat. Instead of playing a single character, they will play all the other characters that the players don't play, and they'll be writing the story and creating counters, all that stuff. They have very different needs from players. The final group is a group that I think is often overlooked. I call them Lorehounds. Lorehounds may never sit at a table, but they are very interested in the story and the lore behind the RPG world that exists. And so obviously they're going to have very different needs than the other 2 groups. So, should you buy this? Well, let's answer that question. The first group. Should players buy this book? So, I want to start off this section by talking about the idea that, in general, for RPG books that you can buy, there tends to be a couple different versions. You have what I call core books, which, if we're talking about like D&D, we're talking about the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide. These are the kind of essential books that you need to be able to play. And then you have expansions in general. And I classify those as 2 different things. On one side, you have what are called campaign settings. And on the other side, you have what are called rules expansions. And they both have different things that they do well and different things that they kind of lack. A Jump Through Time, in my personal opinion, is not a rules expansion. I consider this a campaign setting. And the reason why that distinction is important is a campaign setting has a very different focus, and especially for players, is going to have a very different effect on how they play the game. A campaign setting, the primary focus of the campaign setting is to give you a new world in which to set your games. In order to do that, most campaign settings will also release new rules, new character options, things like that, but they're all kind of tied to, or most of them are tied to the campaign setting, whereas if you decide to use these new character options in a different campaign setting, you have to make some tweaks, or sometimes they just don't work at all because the campaign setting has unique aspects to it that just don't show up in other campaign settings. And so that's the reason why I classify A Jump Through Time as a campaign setting more than a rules expansion. Because a rules expansion is literally that. It's a rules expansion. It's meant to be generic. It's meant to be kind of plugged in however you want to play the game. A Jump Through Time is pretty exclusively focused on time travel, which is not a bad thing. Power Rangers has been doing time travel since Mighty Morphin. I can't remember if there were any time travel stories in the first season, but I know for a fact there was in the second season, and it just kept happening. Power Rangers Time Force, which is massively focused in this book, is an entire series that was about time travel, and they went everywhere. Watch the intro to Power Rangers to the Time Force. By the way, as far as intros are concerned, Time Force, one of the better intros out there. My personal favorites, I love In Space, I love Lost Galaxy, and Lightspeed Rescue. I think Lightspeed Rescue is probably my favorite. Time Force is just under those three. It's not that Mighty Morphin isn't up there, it is, but Time Force is just really, really good. So anyway, this book introduces new rules for time travel and things, and it tries to come up with some kind of limitations, because anyone that's ever tried to play with time travel or has ever watched a TV show or a movie or read a book that had to deal with time travel, the plot holes that you create when you start adding time travel in are just mind-boggling. And it's really, and you have to start getting really anal about, okay, well, how does my specific version of time travel work? If you're wondering how this can like just become this incredibly complicated thing, go watch Avengers Endgame and try to understand when Hulk is attempting to explain why time travel isn't going to break the universe. It's nonsense, and I think they intentionally made it nonsense just for people to go, it's a comic book movie, just let us use our time travel. So they do try to put some limitations on there, but when you look at the character options, is what players are primarily going to be focused on. You have new influences, you have new origins, and you've got 3 new roles. The influences in the origins are very heavily time themed, to the point where if you tried to use them in a game that doesn't use time travel, you would have to really finagle them to make them be useful in that. The new roles are not nearly as focused on time travel. I guess one of the more interesting things is both of the new core Spectrum ones don't appear in any quote-unquote time traveling version of Power Rangers, because the ones that are focused on in here, you have Power Rangers Time Force, you also have Power Rangers RPM, which isn't technically time traveling, but it is set in an alternate dimension. Neither of those have either an orange or a purple ranger. At least I don't think they do. I don't think SPD had a purple ranger, and I know RPM didn't have a purple ranger, and almost nobody's had an orange ranger. But those two new roles are good roles. One of the problems, and I'll go into this more when we do the in-depth portion of the review, but one of the problems that a lot of designers have when they're introducing new classes is a lot of times, because the original kind of stint of classes is already pretty broad, introducing new classes tends to involve, well, this is like a fighter, but they can also do some clericy-like stuff, so we'll call him a paladin. Or things like that, where it's more of like, well, we're going to just jam these two classes together and do that. And I've never been a huge fan of that, especially if there's an aspect of multi-classing that exists in the system, because it's basically saying, well, our multi-classing system isn't really that great, so we're going to force multi-class this one so you can multi-class it with other ones. The interesting thing about the roles in this one, they're new. They don't really feel like they're cannibalizing any other places that are already filled by other core roles. The other thing that I like about this, the Quantum Ranger is an advanced spectrum role. And I mentioned in my original review of the Power Rangers RPG core book, I wasn't a huge fan of the White Ranger because it cannibalized a lot of the Red Ranger's abilities. And most of that was due to the fact that in Power Rangers, as opposed to Sentai where they took the footage for, the White Ranger replaced the Red Ranger. The Red Ranger was still there, but Rocky had a significantly smaller impact on group decision, things like that. He was no longer the leader of the Power Rangers. It was Tommy the White Ranger. And because of that, and because the core book is effectively trying to emulate Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the White Ranger just really was a better version of the Red Ranger without too much changes. The new Quantum Ranger role, which is taken directly from Power Rangers Time Force, is a unique, interesting Advanced Spectrum role. It's unique in the fact that the other Advanced Spectrums that we've seen, you can actually take them at level 1. This one you can't. It doesn't actually have anything for the first 3 levels. The only way you can become a Quantum Ranger is you have to take the Spectrum Shift perk, which is effectively how you multi-class in the Power Rangers RPG. You effectively have to shift into this new role, and that makes it a really interesting role to do. The only issue I have with it, which again I'll go into more when I actually do it, is it does your power weapon is the Quantum Defender, which is a gun and a sword, which is really, really common in Power Rangers. Like, every sword has to be a gun as well. Like, look at the Blade Blasters, look at the Magna Defender's sword. Look, I mean, it's just over and over and over and over and over again. Even Saba could shoot laser beams out of his eyes. Like, they don't have just, weapons. I mean, if you watch Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, Tommy pulls out his Turbo sword, and then when they're backing away, he just holds it like this, and it shoots beams. There's no trigger, there's no nothing, it just shoots beams. But anyway, unlike other Power Rangers in the role-playing game where you really can kind of create your own power weapon, which is what I did in Power Rangers Night Sentinel, which was my mini-campaign I ran last December. I actually worked with each one of the players. I sat down with them and go, hey, what are you thinking about for your power weapon? What kind of things would be interesting to you? And then I built them their own custom power weapons, and it was really cool and really fun. And I enjoyed that, and because a lot of the features require on specific things and name the Quantum Defender, it does limit you a little bit in there. But worse things could happen. Overall, I think it's a cool thing. And then as far as other character options, they have, they call expanded skills for time travel, which is basically they list all the different skills and they give you different ideas about how you might use them in a time travel scenario that maybe wouldn't be used in a regular situation. And some of them make sense. Some of them, like athletics, they basically kind of retread, well, you could climb up a cliff in dinosaur times. It's like, well, I could climb up a cliff in modern times. And then they do give some new suggested specializations. Again, specializations are not a defined list. You can specialize in anything. They just give some new ones to kind of give you ideas of if you wanted to specialize in something more time travel themed, these are things you can do. And those are cool. And then they also have some perks and grid powers, which, again, I would say probably about half of them are very closely related to something time travel. If you don't have time travel in your campaign, you're probably never going to choose these perks because they would never be useful for you. And so that's why I clarify that this is a campaign setting in my mind versus a rules expansion, because that's also going to modify how I recommend it. So let's talk about recommendations. Do I recommend players buy this, and what version should they buy? Something I mention all the time whenever I do this stuff is you can buy physical or digital most RPG books nowadays. Physical tends to be more expensive. Digital tends to be a little bit less expensive. So that's going to flavor my recommendations. For this one, physical book itself is $50. Which is in line with the rest of the books that they sell. They tend to vary in price from about $50 to $60. And then shipping is tacked on top of that. Generally adds another anywhere between like $8 to $15 for shipping. So it can get a little bit pricey. Something that Renegade does, a Jump Through Time has not quote unquote officially released yet, as in the physical book has not shipped. But they released the PDF version early. So if you pre-order the physical, you get the PDF for free, which is how I got mine. Currently, it doesn't. I'm not able to find a listing for the PDF version of this. So it's possible that they're not even selling the PDF until the book officially releases. So that being said, I have no idea what the PDF is going to cost. In general, their PDFs tend to be around $30 to $35. So for players for this particular book, do I recommend you get it? Yeah, I think it's a nice campaign setting expansion. There's some pretty decent stuff in there. Which version do I recommend? For players, unless your GM is planning on running a time traveling campaign, or you are going to actively be looking for like a Time Force style campaign, I probably wouldn't recommend the physical version, just because as far as character options for non-time travel adventures, it's a bit limited. You have 3 new roles, one of which is an advanced spectrum role that is slightly more tightly tied to time travel themes. It doesn't. I don't believe it's got anything in there that is like, oh, you have to use time travel for this. But it does have, because it's linked to Power Rangers Time Force, it's going to be a little of that. So you're basically getting 2 new classes and maybe half a dozen new perks and grid powers. Maybe a dozen. I'd have to look to find out, because there's more than that in here, but so many of them are either somewhat referential to time travel themes or exclusively linked to time travel that you wouldn't be able to do them. And I couldn't really justify $50 for 2 classes and a few perks and grid powers. I think at that point, you're much better off going either for the PDF or maybe getting the physical book through Amazon once it officially comes out and it's been out for a while and you can get it a little bit cheaper. However, right now, like I said, apparently September 25th is when they say on their website it's getting its official release. So if you purchase between now, and I'll have a link in the description, if you purchase between now and the 25th, you'll get the PDF for free. And yeah, that tends to be how I always recommend getting these books. It's how I get every single one of my Power Rangers books. Though anyone at Renegade Studios, if you want to start sending me PDFs for review copies for free, I would not be upset about that. Hashtag hashtag give me free stuff. But that being said, I tend to really like having both a physical and a digital copy, just because I don't care as much about physical books, but it's still really nice to have. And most of the books that they put out are really nice, high quality books. So they're nice and worth it. So anyway, that's my recommendation for players. Moving on. The next group. Should GMs buy this? So, as I mentioned before, I consider A Jump Through Time much more of a campaign setting than I do a rules expansion. And rules expansions are very useful for GMs, but a lot of rules expansions are geared towards players. New classes, new backgrounds, new powers, new spells, whatever it's going to be. A lot of them tend to be geared towards players, with a few new things for GMs. Like they might give you some new monsters in there, or they might have some tips on how to run different styles of adventures. But for the most part, rules expansions tend to be loved by players a little bit more than by GMs. Campaign settings are the exact opposite. Campaign settings are generally geared more towards GMs than they are towards players. And this one, I think, actually fits a really nice happy medium between the two, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff here for players, but there's a lot of really good stuff in here for GMs. There's plenty of lore, which is very, very useful. They even go into how time travel effectively works in Power Rangers, which, despite Power Rangers being 30 years old and having, I don't know how many seasons are on this point. Having many, many seasons. I don't think they're at 30 seasons because they skipped at least one. And having had time travel show up a couple different ways throughout the thing, they've actually remained remarkably consistent. Not perfect. I don't want people filling up the comics with actually, in episode blah, 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 they said it worked this way, and then in this episode it worked this way. We don't need to go into that. But for the most part, they've kind of kept the same idea behind. And so they do try and explain how time travel works in general in Power Rangers. To give you a little bit of a leg up, because any GM that's ever played around with time travel, because there are effectively time travel based spells in Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of other systems, they just tend to be more of putting people into the future or stopping time, as opposed to being able to go back in time or anything like that. And anyone that's ever dealt with something like that knows that it is a nightmare to deal with. Because as soon as you open that door for the players, they're going to transfix on it, because time travel can fix everything. So having that in the book right at the beginning is kind of nice. You're still going to have to deal, because it's not explicit, I guess I could say, as far as how they define how time travel works. They give you a little bit of wiggle room. So you are going to have to make a few choices on your own of, well, this is how I want time travel to work in my setting. Sorry, I think I've got like a eyelash or something on my nose and it's itching. So they lay the foundation. You still get to make a few choices. The new character options, I think are really cool and interesting. But then they also had some new equipment, vehicles, Zord, stuff like that. And then they start adding this entire section where it's kind of like in the core book where it went through Angel Grove and explained all the different areas. This is in there, or if you've read any of the other Essence 20 books, where it will just go through a bunch of different areas and give you little prompts about how to start an adventure in that particular area. They do effectively the same thing, but with time periods, which I really, really enjoy. And they take heavy influence from the comic continuity, which I like, and I think I actually prefer a lot of the comic continuity over the TV series continuity, because TV series continuity, they keep continuity within their respective series. And if there is a crossover event between different series, they do try and keep those as consistent as possible. But a lot of times, things that work in one version of Power Ranger or one series of Power Rangers doesn't work in another one. Whereas the comics, they do their absolute best to keep a single continuity throughout the entire thing. They have alternate timelines and stuff like that, but everything tends to kind of work together, and I really, really like that. And it's a hallmark of comics in general. Marvel's been doing that for like 40, 50 years. DC the same way. So they do have everything going back to like the era of when Zordon was a guardian of Eltar instead of a giant floating head in a tube. They have kind of more a time period based a little bit more on kind of Arthurian legends, which is something that shows up in Power Rangers Time Force, and I think Time Force, and I know Power Rangers Hyperforce went back to kind of spoke with King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, and Chloe the Pink Ranger actually got a battleizer from it, which was super cool. First non-red to get a battleizer, I believe. Or first time the battleizer was given to a Pink Ranger instead of the Red Ranger first. Because technically, I think like the Super Samurai mode was considered a battleizer at one point, and every single Ranger got that in Super Samurai. And then SWAT mode was kind of battleizer-esque, and that was something that all of SPD got. But anyways, yeah, I really do enjoy the fact that they do that. They give you a bunch of little plot hooks if your party does decide to do either voluntary or involuntary time travel, both of which can be fun. And then they have Chapter 5 just has a bunch of new threats for you, which are, again, really interesting. A lot of them are drawn from Time Force and RPM. There's a few other series that are featured as well. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head right now. But overall, it's a nice campaign setting style book. So, should GMs buy this? I would say, again, if you're running Power Rangers, the Power Rangers role playing game, this is another one that I tend to recommend more so for GMs than I do for players, because there's just more here. Excuse me. There's just more here that GMs can use. Again, there's the pretty decent amount of lore. The influences, origins, all that is all technically stuff that's geared towards players, but you 100% can use it to create some very interesting NPCs. The new equipment, vehicles, Zords, all that stuff is stuff that the players work with the GM to design, so that's really fun. And then everything else in the book is just GM focused. Plot hooks for various time travel things, new NPCs, a new an expansion of the contact system, which they introduced in the last space-themed book. Basically ways that creating relationships with NPCs can actually be beneficial to the players, and they can use them. So yeah, all that stuff really good. I would go in choosing between the $50 hardcover or whatever the cost of the PDF is. I would say for GMs, the hardcover is worth it for this one. And again, if you get the hardcover right now, you get the PDF for free, so that you don't have to choose. But if it gets to the point where it's a choice between the two, I think in general, I think GMs get a little bit more out of hardcovers. Especially if you used to do what I used to do, which is do convention hopping and stuff like that. Having hardcover copies is always really, really useful, because the way I used to run, or I tried to run for a little bit and I just couldn't do it, was I would bring a laptop around, and my laptop was a piece of junk that the battery barely held a charge, and not all conventions are going to have power available to you. Fun fact, I found out that depending on the convention center, the convention itself sometimes has to pay extra to have access to power in certain rooms. Because some people use the convention center, like if you're doing if you're just doing like a buffet or something like that, you may not really need power. You may only need one thing for power for like a sound system, so that you can speak to people, and everything else is done, using gel heaters and stuff like that. And so there's no reason to have access to power. Or it may just be a capitalist plot, who knows? But yeah, having hardcover books was something that I really enjoyed, because then instead of having to hope that my laptop would be able to look up what I had, or having to hope that my phone had signal in some of the weird, like some of the convention centers I played in, like the D&D people were literally playing in the basement. So you never, you may not be able to access D&D Beyond. Who knows? So anyway, yeah. For GMs, I do recommend get the physical version if you can, or right now get both the physical and the PDF. But yeah, moving on. The third group. Should Lorehounds get this? Renegade Studio, and specifically the Essence 20 team, has done a really good job that whenever they introduce new mechanics, they almost always have lore fueling those mechanics. And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of times where mechanics just exist because that's how the game has to be played, and they will try to come up with a lore reason afterwards. A really good example of this is the idea of opportunity attacks. If you're unfamiliar with the term, an opportunity attack is effectively if you attempt to do something that you're not supposed to do when you're engaged in melee with something, they will get a free attack against you. As far as lore behind why, there really isn't. A lot of times they will try and say, it was like, well, you're distracted, and so they see that distraction and they capitalize on it. That's not how real combat works. Studied martial arts for 20 years. I've studied stage combat. I've studied various weapon styles, both to historical and modern takes on that. Opportunity attacks are not a real thing in combat. It's just not that. The ability to retreat from an opponent when you're in a disadvantaged position is extremely common in any sort of combat. It is a part of most combat training, is learning how to get away when you're in a disadvantaged position without getting hit. And this is basic, like, first level stuff that you learn, is how to block, how to prevent your opponent from hurting you. So the idea of opportunity attacks somehow being rooted in combat has never been a real thing. What it is it is a mechanical thing that is meant to prevent prevent ranged builds from being massively overpowered. Because if there's no disadvantage to just always running away, then the idea of kiting, which is something that started in MMOs, where you basically just make sure that you can move faster than the person that you're attacking and just keep shooting them, would be the most powerful thing that you could possibly do. And spells like Expeditious Retreat or the Jump spell would be the ultimate most powerful spells in Dungeons and Dragons. So they have to have some sort of mechanic to make it so that there are reasons why you would want to be a melee character. And that's the entire reason for opportunity attacks. The reason I go into that is everything in this book has a lore reason that feels like it came first. Nothing in here goes, oh, that's obviously, it has to work that way. And for Lorehounds, that generally means that even if you're going through the character options, you're going to have a lot of really interesting stuff that you can read. The first chapter is all lore, and it's good and it's interesting. Chapter 2 is the character options, and each one of the influences has really kind of interesting looks into how that has influenced them as a person. The origins are the same ways, where they kind of theorize, well, how does starting from this point kind of shape the characters, what they're going to be. And the roles are like that too. The Purple Ranger role in specifically is this role that's based on creativity and kind of improvisation, which I really, really like. And I'll go into more details during the in-depth portion. But they give kind of justifications for every single ability that they have and link it back to that idea of creativity, which I think is essential for creating really interesting classes. It's one of the things that I did with my D&D class, the Dragon Knight, was every time I introduced something, I had some way to link it to some aspect of dragons or something akin to them. And then, yeah, as they introduce more vehicles, there's more lore. The chapter 4, which is basically just a bunch of different locations and plot hooks. Again, tons of lore. The threats, each one of the threats has a little paragraph at the beginning, tons of lore. This is a really great lore book. And that tends to be true of campaign settings in general. They tend to be much more lore focused because you have to create an entire world in a book that generally tends to be smaller than a core book. So a lot of the book tends to be lore. If you ever picked up, I'm not sure if they even sell it anymore because Wizards has done everything they can to kind of make people forget that the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide was a thing. But if you actually read the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, I want to say like 80 or 90% of the book is just lore. And the last, like, there's maybe like 24 or 36 pages that actually have character options in them. Everything else is just lore about it. It's a really interesting book when you focus on it from that aspect. If you're looking at it as a rules expansion, it sucks. Most of the classes in there were not great. They weren't balanced really well. They had to be rebalanced in later books, and half of them were reintroduced in later books that have a lot more content in them. But yeah, so overall, do I recommend this to Lorehounds? Yeah, I do, and I think the physical version is definitely worth it for all the lore and everything that you get from it. Like, I think my first read through, which I speed read, so even having to stop for a little bit to read through the mechanics, because you can't speed read mechanics, it doesn't work that way. Or at least I can't. I've never met a single person that speed reads really well, that can speed read through something kind of mechanical like a textbook or something and then remember any of it. But even with my speed reading and stuff like that, it took me a few hours to get through it my first time. And yeah, with the amazing artwork and everything, there's a lot that you can get out of this book. And again, I tend to think Lorehounds in general get a little bit more use out of a physical copy than players, simply because they don't have to worry about lugging around a character sheet and rolling dice. They can just open the book and read it wherever they want to. So for Lorehounds, I do recommend the physical version. Again, if you get it before the 25th, you can get both physical and digital for the same price. Otherwise, the digital is just fine. You just have to get some sort of e-reader to be able to use it. Something that reads PDFs. Most phones can do that. I don't know. I don't think I would ever want to read the entirety of a book like this on a phone or a tablet. I think it's just, on a computer, it's perfectly fine for me, but trying to read that on a phone and a tablet, I think would make my eyes sore. So, anyway, moving on. So, final wrap up for recommendations. Players, I do recommend it, but I tend to recommend the PDF version over the physical, unless you are definitely going to be playing a time travel based campaign. Then you'll get the full worth out of it. Otherwise, just get the PDF or wait until it goes on sale somewhere. For GMs, I recommend getting the hardcover because there's tons of stuff in here. It's worth the $50, and the PDF is worth it as well too. But I think it's worth the extra $15 or $20 to get the physical version and then not have to worry about not having power, not having access to the internet, depending on how you save your files, things like that. So, and then for Lorehounds, again, I tend to recommend the physical version because it just gives them more abilities to read it, and there's tons and tons and stuff in here for Lorehounds. So that's it. If you were just here for the recommendations, thank you for watching. In the comments down below, what is your favorite timeline of Power Rangers? Because most of Power Rangers are in this kind of one timeline that kind of weaves and works its ways. But there are a few alternate dimensions. Dino Charge is a different dimension. Beast Morphers is a different dimension. RPM is a different dimension. And technically SPD is kind of a combination of in the future and different timeline dimension style thing, because it hasn't happened yet. And so it may or may not happen the same way when it actually comes to that time. There's a nifty little nod to SPD in Once and Always, where Adam and Aisha, slight, very, very tiny spoilers, are actually part of Space Patrol Alpha. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, let me know what is your favorite timeline of Power Rangers. Just put it in the comments down below. Now it is time for the in-depth review. As a reminder, when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I'm going to go through this book chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things that I think they could do better. I will, because these turned into roughly 2.5 hour videos, I will have timestamps throughout the entire thing. You don't have to watch this all in one sitting. I know YouTube wants you to watch it in all one sitting, but I understand that people have lives and don't want to listen to me drivel on for 2.5 hours. And since this is a smaller book, it's possible I'll have this in under 2 hours. Who knows? But yeah, feel free to jump around to the stuff that you're most interested in. And with that being said, let's start this off. Chapter 1. The Introduction. So, the first chapter is a bunch of lore and explanations about how time travel could work. And they actually give a bunch of different ways that it might work, but they try and keep everything in the they try to keep everything kind of working together. And then they specifically start talking about times that time travel happened in Power Rangers. Things like the Blue Centurion was technically involved into the time travel type shenanigans. The Wizard of Deception in, I think, the second or third series of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers deals with some time travel. They talk about the Time Force Rangers. They talk about Space Patrol Delta and the Omega Ranger. I forgot the Omega Ranger is a time traveling ranger. Completely forgot about that. They talk about the Wild West Rangers and stuff like that. And then they talk about RPM and Venjix and all that stuff. So interesting stuff. It's like I said, it is almost entirely lore, but it's useful lore for GMs, because when you read through it, you can go, okay, so this is kind of how time travel works. If I want to, in Power Rangers, time travel doesn't actually work, folks. For anyone wondering, this doesn't actually teach you how to travel through time. Time travel isn't a thing. If you were hoping that's how this worked, I'm really, really sorry. Time travel isn't a real thing. And each different fantasy or science fiction thing that talks about time travel, it works different in all of them. So, yeah, even if they were true, they couldn't be true because they contradict each other. Anyway, that being said, it is a nice place. It gives you a place to start. Do you have to use this? No. Like my Power Rangers mini campaign that I ran, my Rangers were the first Power Rangers in that timeline. They didn't exist previously. And my Rangers were actually... technically, there was a previous version of Rangers in history, but they're remembered throughout history as like the Knights of the Round Table or other kind of groups of superpowered individuals, the four great generals in a lot of Chinese mythology, things like that. And that's how I kind of explained how they could be the first Power Rangers, but were inheriting their power from other Power Rangers. Power Rangers was a new term. Yeah, you don't have to use the lore that's presented here, but it's a really nice starting point, and it gives you some kind of rules that you can follow. If you try to do time travel and you don't come up with the rules beforehand, you are going to have a bad time. I will guarantee it. It's not fun. Come up with some sort of rules for how time travel works. Alternate timelines, use Back to the Future if you want. If you want to use a really, really messed up version of time travel rules that doesn't even follow its own rules, go ahead and watch Avengers Endgame, because the time travel in there is just bonkers and stupid. I have strong feelings about that movie. Fine movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie, but there were better ways to end that than time travel. And they break their own rules a couple times in that movie. We're not even talking about other movies by other directors that maybe just didn't realize they were... No, in the exact movie, they break the rules. But anyway, it's a nice place to give you a starting point. If you want to come up with your own time travel rules, go for it. It's a headache, but go for it. And ignore as much of this as you want to, but I would say ignore it at your own peril. It's good stuff, and it's well written. So that's chapter 1. Moving on. Chapter 2. Character options. This is kind of your standard character options chapter. It starts with influences, goes to origins, goes to roles. The influences do reintroduce the idea of mandatory hangups, where they will have certain influences that are so powerful that you are required to take their hangup, whether or not you choose them first or second. And I like that. I don't have any problem with that. I think it's an interesting way to create interesting starting values that let you feel a little bit more powerful, but also make you feel a little bit more vulnerable. The only kind of problem I have with it, and it's not really a problem, but again, it's a layout thing where it is a little bit hard. Like, I didn't realize the first influence, which is Beloved. I didn't realize it was an influence because it shows up on the first page, and the text for Beloved uses the exact same text for mandatory hangups, or it's explaining, by the way, there are some mandatory hangups in here. Uses the exact same text style, text size, font, and color. So it looks identical to the thing above it, and the thing above it is just explaining, oh, this is what's going to happen next. I would really prefer them to do something different. Probably not with the title of the influence, because they use it over and over again. Just change the color, change the font, make it italicized, something when you're explaining mandatory hangups, because every time you guys use the exact same font for two different things, it disrupts your kind of visual language. And this is specifically for the SS20 guys, whom, again, I know some of them watch this, and I hope they take this as constructive criticism, not me just wailing on them, because it's not. I really love their products. But you basically have a visual shorthand that you create when you create titles and subtitles within your text, and people will look to it, especially when they're dealing with mechanical things. People will look to it to go, okay, well, what do I need to build a character? And they will look at the visual shorthand first and just infer, is this important, or is this lore stuff that I can look at later? And when you use the same visual shorthand for two different things, it confuses the reader and it forces them to have to reread things a few times. So please, please, please understand that this is not meant to rag on you guys, but this is the second book in a row where you guys have done this, because the Cobra Codex had it, and it was significantly worse than the Cobra Codex, because the whole layout of the book was just very different and very confusing to read. This is just one little problem that I didn't realize until I was reading it right now, because I didn't realize I missed an entire influence because I thought it was just more explanations. But this is, for 2 times in a row, this isn't a mistake. This is a choice you guys have made, and it's the wrong choice. So you need to fix that on newer books at the bare minimum, and if you can do reprints and stuff like that, or updates to the PDF at the bare minimum, just change the font of mandatory hangups, make it italicized, change the color. It would probably make a lot more sense, in my personal opinion. Leave it the same text size, but change it to italics, and make the text black instead of the kind of bold red that it is. You can keep it bold, but just change the text to black, because that just makes it look a little bit, and it'll look similar to the things next to it, where influencer, perk, and hang up, mandatory, all that stuff. But each one of those has an underline, a gold underline underneath it, that will make sure that people understand that this is a different thing, and they're not italicized. So I think if you just do that, it'll make it significantly easier to read, and no one will miss that Beloved is the first influence, which I 100% did. I completely missed it. So, yeah. And then going through the rest of them, like I said, they are interesting things. Like, one of the ones that I really, really like is the Handler influence, which is basically just, you're really good with animals. But when I first read it, before I actually read the description, I read Handler, and I instantly thought, oh, you're a time-traveling character that has gone back in time to handle someone that is important to the future, but you're not allowed to tell them that. And I was a little bit upset that wasn't exactly what it is. I mean, technically Chronicler could, I guess, kind of fit into that, but I really like the idea. I don't think they have that. I don't think they have that specific influence. I mean, they have Time Traveler, which I guess you could do that. But I really think, if you guys need more backgrounds, I really like the idea, and it doesn't have to be time travel, or it could just be like, in fiction. It's constant. The idea that important people will have people that are put there and become their friends, so that the person doesn't realize that they have a watcher, that they have someone that their entire purpose there is to keep that person safe. That happens constantly in fiction. I think it'd be a really cool influence. So take that for what you will. But otherwise, the rest of the influence, I think they're cool. I think they're interesting. When we get to the origins, this is another thing that I think, just layout-wise, I think it would have been better if you had a page break or something between the influences or the origins. It's not that, again, it's not that I completely missed it or anything like that. But if you don't notice the giant gold text at the bottom of page 25 that says origins, I missed it my first time speed reading through this because I wasn't looking at the bottom. I was just going, left to right. And I saw accidental in the exact same font, exact same color, exact same style as Time Traveler. And so I assumed it was just another origin. And then when I went to the next thing and I started seeing, oh, wait a minute, why are you getting essence score increases? Oh, that's because we're an origin. We're not in influences anymore. So I just think, again, you have this gorgeous art for accidental here. I would much rather see that used as a page break. And then start a new page with origins. Again, it would just make it flow easier. That being said, the new origins are really interesting. They have accidental time travelers, and these are, again, almost all exclusively time travel based. I don't think all of them have to be time travel, but accidental, I'll just read you the first paragraph. You exist in a world where time travel is possible, and unfortunately, you got swept up in it. You can't be accidental without time traveling at least being possible in your campaign. Maybe you don't have to actually actively engage in time travel. This could very easily be used as something where you are from the future. Like SPD doesn't really involve a ton of time travel, but the Omega Ranger is a time traveler. So you very easily could use that in a non-time travel focus campaign, but time travel has to be possible. And as soon as you put that idea in the players' minds, they're going to try and use it. And you're probably going to end up, unlike in a television series where you can just write that, okay, time travel is possible, but we're not dealing with that shit. That's not going to work if you actually give your players agency. So yeah. And then I think everything else tends to be a little bit more geared. I think like driven and inspiring look to be not exclusively limited to time travel. Last of My Kind is definitely a kind of time travel, very similar to kind of Coda in Dino Charge, and I don't know the Gold Ranger's name in Dino Charge, where they're both kind of outside of their time. Thank you, phone. They're both kind of outside of their time. Kind of same basic thing of Last of My Kind or Low Tech. And then Volunteer is another one where you're again, throughout time and space, there are many exceptional videos who couldn't enjoy save lives, but instead rose to the occasion and volunteered to make a difference. So is it 100% linked to time travel? No, but it has kind of a hint of it. So, yeah. And then you get into the roles. Oh, and I was 100% wrong. Orange is the one that's creative. Purple is all about feelings. They're still both very useful and very cool. But the two new core roles are the Orange Ranger, which is all about creativity and... Well, I'll just read the description because it's really good. A crafty, creative fighter fueled by imagination and the sheer desire to do great things. I love it. I think it's amazing. And one of my favorite things is the art for the Orange Ranger. The big one that they show, the one that's most prominent, is Kat, who technically was not the Orange Ranger in SPD. She was considered the Cat Ranger. She was officially called the Cat Ranger. And when they have tried to classify her as a color, she has orange on her uniform, but she's been classified as white just as often as she's been classified as orange, because orange is just not an extremely common color in Power Rangers. But one of the other Power Rangers is a version of Skull, who eventually gets, I believe he might be from World of the Coinless. I can't remember which timeline, but it's a comics version. And it's Skull with a scarf, and it's really cool. And a lot of the Orange Ranger abilities are a little bit kind of geared after the idea of Skull's version of the Orange Ranger, which I absolutely adore. I've said this before, one of my favorite scenes in all of Power Rangers at the end of Power Rangers in Space. The finale is called Countdown to Doomsday. It's probably one of the greatest Power Rangers. I think it was a 2-part episode, 2 or 3-part episode. Probably one of the greatest episode series. Ranks right up there with Green with Evil and stuff like that, where they're just phenomenally well written. At the very end, Astronema is won. She's taken over Earth, and she's in Angel Grove, I believe. And she's up there. She's brainwashed. She doesn't know who the Power Rangers are anymore. She goes, "I want the Power Rangers. Give over the Power Rangers, and I will spare you." And the Rangers are all demorphed, and they've just gotten their asses handed to them. So they're like, "Well, what are we supposed to do? We can't. We do this, we're going to lose." So they're having a crisis of faith. And Astronema is basically, if the Power Rangers don't show up, I am going to kill everybody here. I'm going to destroy the planet. And so the Rangers are getting ready, and they're like, okay, I guess this is the end, guys. It's been great. And they're just kind of convinced that they're done. And then Bulk steps forward and goes, "Wait a minute! I am the Blue Ranger." And then I think Skull comes forward and is like, "Yeah, and I'm the Black Ranger." And then this random woman shows up and goes, "I'm the Pink Ranger." And then their professor friend goes, "I am the Red Ranger." And you have all these people just stepping forward in this I am Spartacus moment. And it's brilliant. And it shows just the amazing growth that, thank you, phone, that Bulk and Skull have had since in the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. They were literally just there to be the bad guys and be the comic relief. The bad guys that weren't really that bad. And every so often, you would see little hints that there was more to them, like Skull was actually a classically trained pianist. And he didn't do it because he was worried that Bulk would make fun of him. Because that's what nerds do. And then Skull actually plays something and Bulk applauds for him. You would see these little bits of character growth. That was my favorite. And then seeing both Bulk and Skull, because Bulk has a Purple Ranger version. And it's so good. And the official Zords that they mention in here for the orange and Purple Rangers are, I've got to actually go to the Zord. The alternate timeline Mighty Morphin Reserve Ranger, Eugene Skullovich, has the fearsome Featherdactyl Zord, which is a giant chicken. It's amazing. They have stats for it in here. It's phenomenal. Because anytime they talk about, for those of you who don't know that haven't read any of the Power Rangers books, at 3rd level you get a Zord. And right after they tell you, hey, you need to pick your Zord, they give you examples of what other Rangers of your color spectrum have used for those Zords. And so, yeah, they have the Featherdactyl Zord, which is a giant chicken, for one of the Orange Rangers. They also mention the Orange SPD Ranger, which I've never heard her called the Orange SPD Ranger. She's always been the Cat Ranger. Has been linked to a small vehicular Zord, a Blast Runner. Cat did not have a Zord. However, because the Blast Runner had a similar color scheme to her, she never drove it, she never used it. They've linked those together. So here they make a kind of stronger connection. They've never officially said that, but fans have said, well, maybe that would have been her Zord. And then for the Purple Ranger Zords, the alternate timeline Mighty Morphin Reserve Ranger, Farkas Bulkmeyer, for those of you that didn't know, Farkas is his first name, has the ferocious Baconodon Zord, which is a giant pig. It's amazing! They're so good! And I love the fact that they're acknowledging Bulk and Skull as official Rangers in this. Because, again, it was one of my favorite parts about the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, was the idea that even the bullies could become good guys, and the idea of bullies being these evil, horrible, disgusting people that deserve to be beaten and abused themselves is never been a real thing. Bullies are bullies because they were bullied. In psychology, they call it the cycle of abuse. The vast majority of abusers, like in the upper 90s, are abuse victims themselves that learn to abuse others because they were abused. Abuse is, in generally, learned behavior. And so that's why. Doesn't mean what they're doing is okay or right or anything like that. I'm just saying it's explainable, and once you understand the purpose behind it, you can work on fixing it. However, if you just decide that they're evil, disgusting people that don't deserve to feel better about themselves, then bullying is going to continue to be the epidemic that it has always been. And so I love the fact that in Power Rangers, the bullies, for the most part, and they've kind of shied away from having bullies in later seasons, to where now, Beast Morphers, one of my favorite kind of comic relief duos in Power Rangers is the Beast Morphers. I can't even remember their names because I'm so bad with names, but the two people in Beast Morphers where they belong to Grid Tech or whatever that corporation is called that made the Power Rangers in there. And they're always trying to help, and they're always trying to be as supportive as physically possible, and they're just really bad at it. And they're constantly making mistakes, and they're there for slapstick comedy, which is an essential part of Power Rangers in general. You have to have some slapstick in there. And they're just such wholesome characters, and I love everything about them. I think they're just phenomenal characters. And I've not finished Beast Morphers or the second season of Beast Morphers, so I have no idea what happens to them at the end. But I hope good things happen to them, because they 100% deserve good things to happen to them. Anyway, going back to the actual roles. Like I said, the Orange Ranger is interesting in the idea that there are kind of two defining features, if I would use a term that I use with D&D. They have this thing called Modified Shell, which is basically your Power Ranger suit. It's not spandex or anything. It's your Morphin shell. And the Orange Ranger gets to modify it in certain ways. And so they have 3 levels of it. And every time at first level, you get to choose 2 ways to modify it. At 9th level, you get 2 more ways to modify it. 17th level, you get 2 more ways to modify it. And as you go up, you can pick lower level ones or you can pick the new ones. But they have cool things like one of the modifications is called Comic Flair. There's something amusing about your shell, allowing you to eliminate the frightened or compared condition in one non-enemy target within 10 feet of you as a standard action. So there's something silly about your costume. And because of that, you can get rid of a fairly debilitating condition as a standard action. That's really cool. It's rooted in lore, and yet it also has mechanical benefits, and I love that. And there's a bunch of other things. And then the other kind of defining feature of them is called Cunning Plan. And you effectively can... it makes more sense when I read it. Your instinctive creativity is boosted by the Orange Ranger Spectrum, allowing you to apply skills in new and imaginative ways. Starting at first level, you can spend a personal power to substitute your cunning skill value listed on the Orange Ranger table above for any skill during a skill test. So effectively, you can your superpowers, you're massively creative. And so you can use you can burn a personal power to, instead of using a skill that you may not be trained in or may not have very good stats in it, you can just use your cunning plan thing and come up with something really interesting. And I just love the entire idea behind that. The idea that this is an entire character that is meant to encourage creativity and encourage players to think outside the box. That is the most fun I have had in RPGs, is when a player takes a generally kind of boring power and uses it in a way I wasn't expecting. I love it when that stuff happens. And this is an entire character class that is built around that. It's amazing and wonderful. And it just gets cooler as you get higher. I'm not going to go through everything. Purple Ranger... again, I'm going to read the little description they give here. A warrior filled with the power of emotion, applying different shades of feelings like munitions in a weapon. Effectively, the Purple Ranger's gimmick is they get certain emotions that they resonate with, and when you can burn a PowerPoint to basically make one of these emotions come to the forefront and kind of live in that emotion for a while, and each different emotion has a different benefit for you. Like anger is one of the emotions. You gain an upshift bonus to unarmed and one-handed weapon attacks. So if kind of dig on, or if you kind of not give in, but you reach in and you use your anger to fuel your abilities, you get better at punching and hitting things. Whereas something like joy, when within 5 feet of 5 feet of an ally, you gain an upshift 1 on the first skill test you take each turn. So this one encourages you effectively to be right next to another ally and help other allies, and by helping them you're also getting better with you. And there's a bunch of, like, the whole list of emotions that they have here: 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 and 9 10 11. They have 12 different emotions. I think you start out as having 2 emotions, and I'm trying to see. Yeah, by 19th level, you have 11 different emotions. So one of the things that I always try to emphasize when you have things like this, where you get kind of a menu board of things that you can choose from, you need to have, bare minimum, you generally need to have double the amount of choices that are available that you can ever get. Because effectively what happens is your first few choices will be, which ones do I like the best? And then after you make those first, generally it's anywhere between 2 to 4. After you make those first few choices, every other choice is, well, which is the least bad one that I can choose yet. And when you get to the final one, where there's only 2 choices left, you're not choosing the better one. You are not choosing the worst one. You're going, well, I definitely don't want that, so I guess I have to take this. So that's my only kind of critique of this, is there's just not enough emotional options for the number that they are able to take. If they can take 11, there should be 22. Now, if you can come up with 22 different emotions to put in here, you are better than I am. However, I do think it would be really funny to have ambivalence be one of the emotions in here, just because I love just the idea of ambivalent. For anyone that doesn't know, ambivalence is feeling 2 contradictory emotions at the same time. I think that would be a fun emotion to add. But yeah, otherwise, all of the kind of idea behind this, the fact that you can basically shift into these emotions, and depending on which emotions you have, changes other things that happen. Like, everything about it, I think, is really, really cool. And then they also have an ability called a unique strike, which kind of flirts with the unique weapon that the Green Ranger role gets, but it's distinct enough that I don't feel like it's taking anything away from that. And I'm not going to go into specifics about the unique strike, because get the book, it's worth it. But it's a cool idea, especially around a character that's kind of built around the idea of emotions fueling your abilities, and really tapping into your emotions to use their strength and power. Something that I think a lot of people don't understand, especially if you're looking at other examples of kind of giving into your emotions. If you think Star Wars or something like that, a lot of people will think that, well, being non-emotional is what the good guys do, and then the bad guys just live in their emotions. They live in their dark emotions, like anger. Anger is an evil emotion. You're not allowed to feel anger, because anger is for bad people. Anger is a completely normal response to situations that you feel like are unfair. You feel like you have no control over. Anger is an incredibly common emotion. And for me, like, I get angry a lot. I'm 100% permanently and totally disabled due to nothing that I did. Like, my disability is based on something that happened when I was like 3. And then years of just being years of bad stuff happening repeatedly. Let's leave it at that. None of that was my fault. And upon waking up to it and realizing that it happened, because for a while I didn't even know it happened. I have amnesia of the event. When I realized there was a problem, I started going to therapy and I started doing everything I can to work on myself. And I'm still massively broken and I can't do most of the things that I want to. I have a lot of anger about that. And I don't think that anger is evil or anything. I think it's completely justified. And there's been other situations where I have seen anger, where I've seen situations that have made me angry and I've used that anger to make positive change. It's not that I've given into the anger and I've... the idea of there's a difference between rage and righteous indignation. Righteous indignation is seeing something wrong, going, that's wrong, and that upsets me, and I'm going to use this anger and this fury for what shouldn't be happening to prevent it from happening again. And I think that could be an amazingly awesome thing for a Purple Ranger character to have to deal with. The idea of tapping into emotions to fuel your abilities. Well, there's good versions of emotions and bad versions of emotions. Even emotions that you think of as good, like joy. You can get, you can go for an extreme version of joy where you get into kind of a manic state where you're dealing with mania, or you could go in a completely different direction and start dealing with hedonism. Where your joy fuels you to seek out more things that make you feel good to the detriment of everyone around you. I think that's a really cool story idea that you could have for a character that taps into their emotions. Or you could do the normal Power Ranger thing where it's just like, well, emotions are cool and you keep it kind of surface level. That's perfectly fine too. Power Rangers doesn't tend to get deep too often. And that's perfectly fine. It's a kid's show. It doesn't need to get deep all the time. It does get deep every so often, and that's when it's real good. But, so anyway, yeah, overall, the Purple Ranger is really cool. The biggest Purple Ranger that they focus on for this, there's a lot more Purple Rangers. Thank you, phone. There's a lot more Purple Rangers that exist in Power Rangers than orange ones. But the one they focus on is RJ from Jungle Fury. He's the Wolf Ranger in Jungle Fury. Again, I don't think he's ever referred to as the Purple Ranger. He's just referred to as the Wolf Ranger, I think. Then they also have Korag from Mystic Force, which I love. Mystic Force is one of my favorite seasons. And then they have the Purple Ranger from Dino Charge. Dino Charge had 70,000 Rangers. And then the last one they have there, they do have Bulk in his Purple Ranger outfit, which his helmet is a normal Power Ranger's helmet, but he's big because he's overweight, and we have to acknowledge that he's overweight. But his helmet has little piggy ears and a mohawk and a little piggy snout with horns on it. And it's so great. I love everything about it. Again, I am all for Bulk and Skull becoming Power Rangers. I think 100%. To be perfectly honest, since this is the last Power Rangers series before Netflix takes it over completely, I kind of want in Cosmic Fury Bulk and Skull to just show up and get Ranger powers just for a little bit, just like Mick gets in Ninja Steel or Super Ninja Steel. I can't remember which one, but Mick gets to wear the Red Ranger and wield some of the Red Ranger powers for just a little bit. And I thought that was just the most special, amazing thing, because he's one of my favorite mentors of the entire series, because he's an extremely effective mentor. And so I realize Cosmic Fury already been filmed. There's nothing they can do to change anything in it now. But I really would love to see Bulk and Skull finally get Ranger suits in, and just for a tiny bit. Or if they can't do it there, do it in the comics and just give them... Again, obviously they have done it in the comics, but it was in an alternate timeline. I would love the Bulk and Skull to just save the Power Rangers once, just for fun. I think that's great. And then the final one is, again, the Quantum Ranger. It's Advanced Spectrum role. I mentioned in the Should You Buy It, this is unique of the Advanced Spectrum roles in the idea that you actually cannot take this at level 1. There's nothing at level 1 for this character. The only way you can take this particular role is you have to take the Spectrum Shift grid perk. And that changes from whatever your old role was to this one. And it actually gives you what you get to keep from those other roles. when you shift to this one. So there's actually a table here that says, by the way, when you do this shift, this is the stuff you get to keep from each one of the classes. So very useful and very great. And then again, it's very, very, not only is it very, very focused on the Quantum Defender, it also gives you your Zord. You don't get to design your Zord, you get the Quantosaurus Rex. Which again, I understand this is very heavily inspired by the Quantum Ranger, but I'm not a huge fan of the fact that you're taking away a little bit of choice from the player in order for them to play this, whereas that's never happened in any of the other roles. So I don't know why this one is so incredibly focused on this. But yeah, overall, it's a cool thing, and you get a lot of really, really cool stuff that you get to do. But you have to have use the Quantum Defender. You have to have Quantosaurus Rex as your Zord. Yeah. After the rolls, they give new roll options. So I think this is probably the best part of this book for me specifically, because what it does is it allows you to change an aspect of the roles that exist in the core book. Like for the green spectrum, and it tells you what perk it replaces. So for the green spectrum, one of their perks is called Unique Weapon, and it's based on the Dragon Dagger from the Green Ranger. The Dragon Dagger is used to control the Zord and all that, and so part of being a Green Spectrum Ranger is you get to design your own power weapon. It's a really cool process. My White Ranger in Night Sentinel, my mini campaign, used the Green Ranger role because I don't like tying them to spectrums. I made a whole video about how I would change it, and I will probably sometime make a video about what I would call these three instead of the orange, purple, and quantum. Probably come up with different names, at least for the orange and purple, because again, I don't like tying roles to colors. I don't think it makes much sense. I don't think it fits with the lore. But anyway, she and I worked together to create her weapon, and it turned really cool. She basically had a fountain pen that existed outside of her morph form, and she could use it outside of her morph form. And what would happen is she could transform it from a fountain pen that worked into basically a guisarme. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a glaive. It's effectively a Chinese glaive. It's used. It was made famous by or Guandao. Maybe that's what it is. Guandao. Because it was made famous in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. One of the three brothers of, is it Shu? I can't remember which team they fought for. One of the three brothers used a Guandao, and he was this giant of a person that used this massive Guandao. So anyway, for the new role options, you can replace Unique Weapon with Brainstorm. And it's basically, with this perk, you can spend 1 hour to attempt a technology skill test to craft a weapon or piece of gear. And there's a typo here because it says weapon or piece of gear wills last until a fumble is rolled on a skill test using that item. I think it's supposed to be that will last. So again, anyone that's watching this, page 45 under Brainstorm, it's second column. It's fourth line down under Brainstorm. But basically, it allows them, instead of having a singular unique weapon, they can spend an hour and create whatever weapon they want. And depending on how crazy it is, like a standard item doesn't require a skill test, but as you get up to prototype and unique or theoretical type items, it requires a pretty high skill test and the use of a story point. So again, it kind of changes how the Green Ranger works. Which I think is interesting and fun. But I think the one that I like the most, the White Spectrum modification, gets rid of Follow Me, which is an ability that was taken directly from the Red Ranger. And it's one of the things that I didn't like about the White Ranger, is the fact that it's a reskinned Red Ranger. And I didn't like that. So the new one is Mysterious Aura. And without getting too technical, it's a Paladin Aura. it turns the White Ranger into a Paladin-style character. If you're not familiar with what a Paladin aura is, since like 2nd edition, I think, Paladins have had this ability where they radiate this aura that does certain things. In 5th edition, it gives people bonuses to their saving throws based on the charisma modifier of the Paladin, and each different flavor of Paladin has a different aura it does. Some of them prevent you from becoming afraid while within the aura. Other ones cause enemies to be afraid. Like, there's a bunch of different things. That's effectively what this does, but you have 3 different flavors of aura. Every time you activate the aura, which costs a move action and a power point, you can choose a different aura. So it really changes how you play the White Ranger. And I think this particular thing makes a better White Ranger, just in general. I think it makes a more interesting and unique White Ranger. The rest of them are very interesting as well. I'm not saying like any of these alternates or these new role options are wrong or anything. I've got to say the White Spectrum one is probably my favorite. And were I to use a White Spectrum Ranger in any of my games, I would probably require them to use this instead of the other one, because the other one already exists on the Red Ranger. And if you already have a Red Ranger, having 2 characters with the exact same ability, that particular ability, Follow Me, only one of them can ever use at a time, because all the other Rangers have to choose to follow one of them. Both of them can't use it to get a benefit or anything. So I just think that's better. And then it goes into expanding skills for time travel. Again, some of them are really... they don't really change a whole lot. Like the new specialization for strength-based skills is classic sports. While sports activity from the Power Rangers role-playing game core rulebook covers most modern sports, this specialization covers sports and games that were once widespread in past eras that are no longer common, such as Greco-Roman discus throws or Pall Mall during the height of the 1500s. I had to look up what Pall Mall is. It's basically a precursor to croquet. And I'm not a huge fan of croquet. But Pall Mall was an early version of it that was popular in the 1500s. So, yeah, that one is like, okay, so more sports. But then you start getting into some more interesting ones, like Intimidation. There's a specialization called Standoff that I really like. It's basically, the gunfighter standoff kind of thing. And it goes from there. Some of them, again, really interesting. Some of them less so. And then we get new perks and grid powers. They have new, they have some new foreign perks. They actually have a new perk called Additional Zord, where now you can actually have multiple Zords. You'll only be able to call one at a time, but that still kind of fits in with quite a few Power Rangers teams where certain characters would get a couple different Zords, and they would choose which one they wanted, depending on the situation. I know once we started getting into, I think, Dino Fury, a few of the Rangers get extra Zords and stuff like that they kind of pick and choose which one is better for the... I haven't made it through all of Dino Fury Season 1, much less Season 2 yet. Yeah, I like the idea of that. Then there's other... there's other stuff that I think is really, really cool. And some of them start having interesting things, like one of the ones is Lance of Light, and they have new prerequisites. This one is must have defeated a threat level 8+ enemy to take the Lance of Light. I think these are grid perks, right? Yeah, these are just perks. We haven't gotten to the grid powers yet. So yeah, they do add some kind of interesting stuff, and like I said, probably about half of them have very strong time time travel focuses, like Going Heals. I'll just read the description. You're a trained gunfighter that knows the importance of getting the drop on your target. Well, gunfighting is not really something, at least not as it is described here, is not something that we really deal with in modern times. So this one does have kind of a pretty strong tie to the Old West and things like that. Again, Not a bad thing. It's just the idea that, okay, well, this is definitely a campaign setting and not just a rules expansion. And then the new form that they add is Time Force form. And yeah, it's just lets you play as the Time Force Rangers, which is perfectly fine. And then some new grid powers, things like chronophile access, using the advanced technologies available to the Time Force Rangers. Very time focused. And then Guardian Strikes, whether from being trained on Eltar to serve as one of its protectors, or from watching historical records of Zordon's earliest days as a Bronze Guardian. So that's highly referential to the past, specifically Zordon's past, and their future vision and other stuff like that. So again, a lot of the abilities of this are very, very much limited to a time travel or time force based thing. Then they add the new contacts, and like I said, contacts are contacts are contacts. If you want to use the contacts exactly how they are, do it. Like they have the Silver Guardians, or they have the Time Force specifically, where you can get a personal Time Force Ranger assigned to your team. Or you can make a generic version. Like the Silver Guardians are just a generic military unit that are not Power Rangers, that sometimes clash with the Power Rangers. So if you don't want to specifically use the Silver Guardians, it can just be any kind of law enforcement, specialized law enforcement group. Things like that. So, yeah. And that's Chapter 2. Moving on. Chapter 2 is really long. But Chapter 3. Tools Through Time. Much shorter chapter. This is a lot of time travel stuff. Like the first subheading in here is time travel equipment. So they have time portals and chronomancy, magical time travel, where they talk about stuff like that, and energems and time scrolls and stuff like that. And they talk about SPD Chrono Personal Transit System, which is what the Omega Ranger used, Time Force Chronotech. Again, all of this new stuff is entirely focused on time travel. So if you're not doing time travel, this is mostly useless to you. And then era-specific equipment for the Awakening, which is super, super long ago when the Morphin Masters first appeared. They have arch keys, which open up the various arches that they use to travel between planets. And stuff like that. Prehistoric times. Dynastic era, which is during the dynasties of Egypt. Medieval area. Wild West, Future Earth, Corinth. Again, some of this stuff is really not going to be useful if you're not doing a time travel based thing. And then new miscellaneous equipment, even the miscellaneous equipment. Chrono Case, Chrono Communicator, Chrono Morpher, Chrono Trigger. I'm sorry, this is the first time I've read that aloud, and I instantly went, Square? Frog? For anyone who doesn't know, Chrono Trigger is a game by Square. Used to be Squaresoft, I think, when they made it, but now it's Square Enix. It's an amazing game. I gotta read this. Chrono Trigger. This is a restricted weapon upgrade that can be applied to any ranged sidearm, flooding the weapon with time-shifted temporal energy servers, increasing fire rate of the weapon at the cost of accuracy. So what is it? It's a time trigger. It's like a way to shoot faster. But the fact that they call it Chrono Trigger, I find that hilarious. Anyone from Renegade, if you're watching this, if that was intentional, bravo. If that was unintentional, you guys are hilarious. If that was intentional, you know. Cryostasis 2, Silver Guardian Flexfest. Again, all of this very, very, very time travel focused. And then they have a new battleizer, the Quantum Mega Battle Armor. And then a bunch of new vehicles. The vehicles themselves are not quite as kind of trapped to time travel. There are things like the Time Jet, which is a vehicle the Time Force used, and the Stratocycle, which was, I think that was a... it was either something for the Time Force or something for the Quantum Ranger, but it's all Time Force stuff. And then the time shift, vector cycles, all stuff that you found in Time Force. They have some new weaponry, which I'm again. You have Chrono Saber, Chrono Blaster, Electro Booster, Vector Weapon, Vortex Blaster. All this stuff is just identical stuff that came from um, Time Force, RPM, a little bit of SPD. So stuff like that. And then every so often you'll have like Eltarian Blaster. So stuff from other stuff. I know I'm making this really, really easy to understand. I do like the fact that they added a bullwhip in, because I'm a huge fan of whips in general, because I'm a Castlevania fan. So I like that. And so there's a few things in here that you definitely could use as a basis to create new power weapons, or just new things that the players might use. Like maybe one of your characters, like part of their backstory is their, like maybe one of their influences is they're a performer of some sort. And the way that they perform is kind of a Jacques the Whipper kind of thing. For anyone that doesn't know who that is, just look up Jacques, the French spelling of Jack, Z Whipper on YouTube. He's got tons of videos, and he does whip cracking, which is really cool. They have competitions for it and everything. Because I've seen videos by Jacques the Whipper is not the world record holder, but I've seen videos done by the world record holder, and they're amazing. But yeah, it could be that one of your characters practices whip cracking as like a hobby, and then maybe one time putties show up while they're whip cracking, and they get to use their whip in the fight. By the way, if you do practice whip cracking, never, ever, ever, ever use a whip at a physical human being. They're dangerous, and they create a sonic boom. That's what the whip crack is it's a tiny sonic boom, and they can break flesh and cause significant amounts of damage, so never actually use them on anyone. But in a magical fantasy world where Power Rangers exist, totally use them on putties, because putties aren't people, they're little clay things. And then again, yeah, they just have a bunch of new power weapons and stuff like that, and then new Zords features, which again, these actually are much less specifically tied to any specific season, and they just are really, really cool. Things like multi-megaform, which is something that happens a lot in more modern Power Rangers, where the Megazord has like multiple versions of the Megazord that it can form depending on where the creatures or which Zords actually go into it. So now there's an actual perk for that. And it doesn't technically do that. What it does is it, while combining Megaform, your Zord abilities, your Zord applies one of these Megaform traits. So you get to choose 3 different traits, and depending on how your Zord fits in, you provide a different Megaform trait each time. Which I think is really cool and interesting, and get a couple different Zords to do that, and you can have things like the Dino Fury Megazord has like all these different versions of the Megazord depending on which Ranger is kind of in the lead and which Zord parts they use. And I like that. I think it's a really fun aspect of Power Rangers that modern Power Rangers has that they really didn't have in early Power Rangers, aside from like the difference between the Megazord and the Mega Dragon Zord, or Dragon Zord Battle Mode. You know, they had a couple different ways that the Zords could interact with each other. But that was about it. And then you get into the modern stuff, and it's really cool and customizable. And I like that. I think it's fun. Also, they have one that's called Mobile Headquarters, and I just love it. Where your Zord is now, you know, basically like the Astro Mega Ship. Where, yeah, when you're not this is our headquarters as well as our Zord. So I think that's cool. And then just other stuff. Some new Megaform traits, which again, really, really cool. And then a bunch of new examples, Zords. So they have the different Time Force Zords. And they show the different versions of the Time Force Megazord. So they have the Time Force Megazord Red Mode. And then they had Time Force Megazord Blue Mode. And then the Time Shadow Megazord. And so I like that. Then they have Quantosaurus Rex. And then they have the one of the RPM Megazords. I think the first one. Which has the Bear Crawler and the Croc Carrier and all that stuff. And then they have a couple different flavors of Megazord for them. They have the High Octane Megazord, the Mach Megazord, the Paleo Max Megazord, the Valve Max Megazord, the Zenith Megazord, and then the RPM Ultra Zord, which is all the Zords put into one. And I think that's really where, that might be the first time, I'm not 100% certain, but that might be the first time where we had the Rangers having just a plethora of Zords. Depending on which Zords they put in, their Megazord would be different. And then they have miscellaneous Zords, the Baconodon, which is amazing. I think it's a warthog rather than a pig. But the Baconodon and the Featherdactyl. And I love them. The artwork is amazing. The Featherdactyl is an orange chicken that shoots lasers out of its mouth. The Baconodon is a purple warthog with a mohawk. They're amazing. And then, yeah, that's chapter 3. Moving on. Chapter 4. Morphin Across the Ages. Again, this again goes through methods of time travel in Essence 20, just to kind of give you, okay, well, how do you want them getting there? And they do have a really cool artwork at the beginning of that, where it looks like it's Battle at the OK Corral with Wyatt Earp and everything, except in addition to like Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp, there's also a blue Time Force Ranger just standing with him. Like you got Doc there holding his cane and his pistol firing off, and you got Wyatt Earp. I don't know if Wyatt Earp is the one with the shotgun or the one that's on one knee just fanning the hammer. And then you just have the blue Time Force Ranger with his Chrono Blaster. Totally makes sense. Morph Across the Ages, like I mentioned before, is basically just a giant map of time periods that they give you a little bit of kind of lore behind them, and specifically the lore behind time travel and how you might introduce time travel to your campaign, and then and some reasons why you might want to deal with time travel in your campaign. And then it just gives you different time periods, like the Awakening, which is basically when the Morphing Masters were there and they first started, doing things, and that's predates everything in the Power Rangers universe. It's basically the beginning. And then they go prehistoric times, which should be fairly easy. Master Vile's War, which is basically the first time Zordon fought Master Vile and the forces of darkness when he was a Gorda, when he was a Guardian. The Dynastic Era, which is, again, Egyptian times specifically. Another fun fact, because a friend of mine actually studies it. Everybody thinks of Egypt as like, oh, all of Egypt is what we see in Stargate. Ancient Egypt is just one thing. The Egyptian dynasties lasted for thousands of years. Think about how much modern society has changed in the last 100 years. Now multiply that much change by 10. And that is only a portion of the dynastic era of Egypt. There was so much variation in what we consider, quote unquote, ancient Egypt. It is a massively wide thing. And they specifically, I think they specifically target the most well-known version of dynastic Egypt, which is around 3000 BC. And then again, give some notable personalities, the dynastic era. Same thing, notable landmarks, plot hooks. Medieval, Wild West, and then Future Earth / Corinth, the last bastion of humanity. So they give a bunch of different descriptions of how things might work, and reasons you might show up in there, and locations that you might find in those eras. Probably one of my favorite ones, the Mecha Graveyard in Corinth. I think it's super cool, and there's a lot you can do in that area with just the little description that they give for it. And that's it. Like it's a really really simple chapter. There's not a whole lot to it, but the amount of stuff. Again, the entire purpose of this chapter is to give GMs ideas on how they might want to introduce time travel and what kind of cool stuff they could do with to time travel. One of the things that I have learned is one of the easiest and most effective ways to run an RPG campaign that the players really do drive the story is I always start off with basically kind of like one shots or side quests, depending on what how you want to frame them. And I'll come up with a couple different side quests that I can send them on, and I give them choices. And none of the side quests are super, super well developed or anything because I will kind of develop them as the players make their choices. But as the players make choices in these side quests, I can finally start kind of gearing it towards, okay, well, what do I want the overall plot of this campaign to do? And I can see what is what the players are interested in. And I can see what choices they're making, and therefore, when I do finally decide, okay, I think this is going to be my big baddie for this particular campaign. First of all, they already know their characters really well. They're heavily invested in this big baddie, and now I can kind of flesh them out and create a story that they are very, very excited to finish, as opposed to if you already have kind of a big baddie in mind before you even start the campaign. Well, players can get disenfranchised really, really quickly because they feel like they're being kind of railroaded. And things like this are a perfect way to do that, where they give you a bunch of different hooks and things that you can do, and then you can let the players kind of play with these hooks and see how they like them. And then, depending on the choices that they made, you can go, okay, well, it looks like they're really enjoying this, so maybe our big baddie will be from this period, or maybe they just it's becoming apparent that they just really don't like time travel in general, and they would like to be set in their own time period. That can be like the first arc of the campaign is basically closing time portals, so we can focus on the stuff in the present and stuff like that. So, yeah, overall, great chapter. Moving on. Chapter 5. Threats. Bunch of new monster stat blocks. And again, they do classify kind of different levels of creatures. You have minions. You have... Where are they? Do they not say what they are? You have minions, you have like monsters of the week, and then you have like villains, which are things that come back over and over and over again. I don't know if they actually define them in here, but they define them in other ones. Yeah, and I again, they all have interesting stat blocks. They have chillers, which I believe is not RPM. It's the other car themed one that I don't like. Operation Overdrive. I think chillers are from Operation Overdrive. Cyclobots are definitely RPM. Batlings, I don't know what Batlings are for. They say Queen Banshira, which I know the name, but for the life of me, I can't remember where she comes from. I'm actually going to look this up right now because I 100% cannot remember. Is she SPD? Yeah, she's SPD. I thought she was SPD. So I guess the Batlings were supposed to be from SPD. I can't remember if they actually used Batlings in SPD or not. But yeah, then we have Chillers, Cyclobots, Dark Dimension Phantasms, which is stuff that's linked to the Wizard of Deception because time travel is a really, really important part of this, and they heavily associate him with time travel. And then Dark Dimension Possessed, and then Demon Warriors were from Vipra, which Vipra I believe was Time Force, because she worked with Rancic. And then some Eltarian rebels and guardians and stuff, and lava lizards from prehistoric times, which I think are created specifically for this. Then my favorite, Putropods, because they showed up in Turbo Power Rangers movie, and they were interesting creatures to fight. They only show up for a single fight. but they're cool. I don't know if they even show up in the television series or if they're exclusive to the movie, but they are weird, furry lizard things, and they're amazing. And then again, they get to your Monster of the Week style stuff. One of them is called Camera Attack Bot, which I find hilarious. Again, I believe most of these are Operation Overdrive, RPM, and Time Force. And yeah, I'm just kind of looking through Nightbot and Max Axe. The naming conventions in Power Rangers are probably my favorite things ever. RabbitCon is one of the bad guys, and he looks like a mess. And he served under Ransik, so he's one of the mutants from Ransik for Time Force. Just some amazing monsters in here. Univolt, TurtleCon, Venomark, Vexicon. And then we get to lieutenants, which are kind of your bigger bad guys. So Frax, General Crunch, the various generals of Venjix. Nadira, who's Time Force. Maybe Vipra wasn't Time Force. Maybe Vipra was Mariner Bay. Might have been. I don't know. I can look. Let's go. Vipra, Power Rangers. Oh yeah, she was Vipra was Lightspeed. Yeah, I love Lightspeed, but it's been a long time. And then they have actual villains, which are your boss ending ones. So they have the Final Attack Bot for Venjix, which is really big. Furios, which was Operation Overdrive. Moltor, which is another Operation Overdrive. Ransik, Vipra. So again, that's who's it's Lightspeed Rescue. And then Wizard of Deception. Wizard of Deception in the TV series was a Monster of the Week, and they have kind of elevated him to a major villain to give you someone to have as like your time traveling villain. Because even Time Force, Ransik was from the future, but he wasn't like corrupting all of time. He was just trying to corrupt this part of time. Whereas the Wizard of Deception, Dark Chronomancer, you can use if you want to have a time travel campaign where you have this villain that's forcing you and is messing with time all over history. This is kind of an outline of a character that is very, very time focused and could be an ultimate evil level of time-based BBEG. So, and yeah, and that's it. Moving on. So, final thoughts. Overall, I like this book better than the Cobra Codex for two reasons. One, I just like Power Rangers better than G.I. Joe. And two, despite this still having a couple layout issues, the layout issues are significantly more minor and significantly easier to get past than the one in the Cobra Codex. And I like the new stuff. The Cobra Codex didn't add any new roles or anything like that. It added some new focuses, which I guess is kind of the same thing, but not really. I like the new roles. I think they're very, very interesting and really, really fun. I like the new grid powers. I specifically like the new basically alternate options for role abilities that they introduce in this, and I would love to see them continue along that thread. To where, yeah, new roles, super, super fun, but introducing new options for older roles so that you can have a little bit more variety. Because, again, one of my biggest issues with the original core book of the Power Rangers RPG, which is right there, was the idea that replayability was a little bit low because your average Power Ranger team is either 5 or 6 people. And there was 6 roles and an advanced spectrum role. And the advanced spectrum role was basically a rehash of one of the other roles. So if you played a traditional Power Rangers series and had one of every role, then if you wanted to play another Power Rangers game, you were going to feel like you were rehashing what had already happened because you really didn't have that many choices. And so by adding new roles, that's one way to give more choices. But another way that they found here is just changing how the old roles work and giving alternate options that you can choose. That creates a lot more customizability. That creates a lot more replayability. And you can now play in multiple Power Rangers campaigns and not feel like, oh, I'm playing somebody else's character. Because I remember how they use this character and I have to use it the same way because the characters have the same base. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated. Power Rangers, because you get all those different kinds of perks like grid powers and general perks and Zord perks, you can kind of customize your Rangers you level up. But at the first few levels, all Blue Rangers are the same. All Yellow Rangers are this is the same. So, yeah, I like this. I think it's really, really cool. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. Made it under 2 hours. As always, if you enjoy this piece, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important in the comments down below. What is your favorite time traveling flavor of time travel? Do you like how it's been done in some of the Power Rangers, like the Wizard of Deception aspect in Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers Time Force, things like the Omega Ranger, or even things like Shattered Grid, which involved a little bit of time travel as Tommy kind of went through different timelines. So what's your favorite flavor of time travel? It doesn't even have to come from Power Rangers. Maybe you just really, really enjoy Back to the Future, or Star Trek 4 was your absolute favorite Star Trek. Who knows? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, is all for me today. I'll see you guys the next time with another in-depth review because there's one more book I got to cover. Anyway, have fun. Bye-bye.